Alfred, of course. But, yeah. Well, I mean, okay, yeah, that's been a few years.
Our neighbors, right?
Yeah.
Your mic's on.
All right.
Right.
Joe, I'm going to switch off to
Yeah, I think they're on already. Oh, did you? They were on. Oh, you turned them on? Okay.
They're on?
Yes. They're on.
Yeah. Should we do it?
Good evening, everyone. That's pretty loud. If you can hear my voice and you are here to participate and learn from the planned HBCU-UP former PO panel, we are getting started. If you are joining us virtually, thank you for your patience. Just checking. How is the sound in the back? Can you hear me pretty good? Okay. Thank you.
like headache inducing. Is that the sun?
No. Spotlight up or something.
Thank you.
Is that better? Yeah, that's like migraine inducing. Still bad.
Do you want to switch? Oh, you can switch sides? I can switch sides. I don't want you to have it fun.
I'm just not going to look over there if that's okay.
Okay.
If I don't look at.
Well, thank you for everyone assembled here in person. And again, thank you to those of you who are joining us virtually. We're going to go ahead and get started with this panel conversation. And I'm excited still, but I have to say it has been a full day. I don't know if you feel the same way, but it has been awesome. It's been a lot of great information disseminated. It's been a lot of interesting conversations and engagement. And I'm pleased that you're pleased. I've received much positive feedback throughout the day, so that's always good to hear. And I want to invite your continued suggestions, right? We are growing and how we continue to create spaces for our HBCU-UP PIs, and so we invite you to continue to offer that feedback to us. And so this evening, I have to say that I've been looking forward to this panel since my colleague Joyce had the idea to have this panel. When she suggested it, I said, Joyce, you are amazing, because we who are currently serving as program officers on the behalf of HBCU-UP, we kind of identify ourselves as just the current leg of this long relay that started really more than 25 years ago. There was work that was rooted in ensuring that HBCUs were represented in NSF's funding portfolio. And we are so very thankful for all of the persons who have served before us. And so to have a group assembled with those of us, or those who are here with us tonight, it's a pleasure, right? We should know that we shouldn't take this for granted. The insights and perspective that will be shared are some things that I think we will hold on to, certainly at the program level. I don't know how much you all think about program implementation, but I know that this is something that our team talks about at least weekly, about how we can do this better, how we can be of service to the community better. And we want to have this conversation really with this team of assembled former program officers to help us reflect on this topic of institutional capacity building. So we've been kind of talking about this a little bit throughout the day. I have to admit that it was unplanned, that our plenary session featured by Dr. Aaron Lynch, there was kind of this conversation around research capacity on HBCU or HBCU campuses, which was a great segue to kind of give us some insights into what were the thinkings around this idea at the institutional level. But I think it's important that we underscore from a programmatic level, how has the program been designed to meet the institutional capacity needs of HBCUs? And that's really what I hope this conversation will bring about tonight. Some reflections on the evolution of how this program has come to be, how it has evolved over time, and really end with some insights about what we should be continuing to think about from a programmatic perspective. And so certainly before we formally open it up to have the panelists introduce themselves, I want to take a moment to really recognize anyone who is in the audience who has previously served as a program officer for HBCU-UP. I know for certain that at least one person has been present throughout the day. I do not currently see her, but I want you all to know that engaging as program officers, we had the session about being a rotator, right? We had the session about how you can contribute in that way. We want to certainly invite you to do that. But we also want to recognize beyond the program officer role that there are many, many other persons at the National Science Foundation who help make the program operate. So every program specialist that has ever served HBCU-UP, we want to lift them up and recognize their efforts, for every program analyst that has contributed to the success of this work, every contractor who has worked on behalf of HBCU-UP. We want to just acknowledge all of those persons and create space to just frankly say thank you. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your commitment. But specifically, thank you for believing in the programmatic mission. And thank you all for really being here, making time and space to contribute to this conversation. So with that said, I'd like to ask the panelists to start us off by introducing themselves. And I'm intentionally going to ask them to introduce themselves in the order in which they served. And I'm going to ask them as well that as I present the few questions to them that I have and I've previously shared with them, that they answer in the order of their service. And what I hope happens is that you and I can see the evolution of the thinking. It's really for us to understand what were they thinking at the time that they were serving, what was informing kind of their decision making. And so I'm really excited. So with that, we're going to start. And the order will be Dr. Jessie DeAro, who is currently serving as the acting division director for the Division of Equity for Excellence in STEM. Next, we have Senior Research Associate from PRISSEM Academic Services, Dr. Claudia Rankins, who happens to be my former program officer. So, you know, she's my person. And then we have Dr. Emanuel Waddell, who is currently professor and chair of Nanoengineering at North Carolina A&T State University, who I also want to recognize as one of the two program officers that was there when I onboarded that really helped immerse me in what was the practices of HBCU-UP at the time. And so in that order, thank you again, but feel free to introduce yourselves.
Thank you, Carleitta. I was kind of planning on going after Claudia, but so as I mentioned this morning, I did start working with the HBCU-UP program in 2003, and that is because I moved here to the NSF from the U.S. Department of Education, where I worked with the Title III and Title V programs. Most of you should be familiar with that because Title III Part B provides a lot of money to HBCUs every year. Anybody not familiar with Title III Part B? All right. One of the reasons I might mention that again later on, so I want to make sure you were familiar with it. And so that is where I learned about minority serving institutions because I'm a chemist by training. I am not a social scientist, but I feel like I'm an honorary one, maybe, learning about diversity, equity, inclusion on the job, working with minority serving institutions, both Hispanic serving institutions and historically Black colleges and universities for the majority of my early career. And then more recently, supplementing that with working with the advanced programs focused on gender equity for faculty in STEM disciplines. And that's my background. And I guess we move it. Okay, sorry. I'm not good with transitions.
Good evening. I'm Claudia Rankins. After 22 years of working at Hampton University in many capacities, I started as a lecturer and my last job was Dean of the School of Science. I decided to do something different in 2008 and apply for a job at the National Science Foundation. I remember the interview and I remember the question Jessie, who was my program officer at the time, asked. I was rambling on about all of the stuff I did at Hampton and she said, so where are the publications and what have you learned and the metrics and evaluation? And I was, oh my God, I don't have this job now because like so many of you, I had not done that part. I did get the job and stayed for 12 years. My sole objective was to work with the HBCU-UP program and for the HBCU community. I turned down all sorts of other offers while I was at NSF. I did not want to do anything but that. Retired a few years ago and I still work with the HBCU community.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Emanuel Waddell. I was at HBCU-UP from 2019 to 2022. Previously, before coming to HBCU-UP, I was at University of Alabama in Huntsville for 15 years. I'm a chemist, another chemist at the table, in addition to the physicist, and I guess we're 3 chemists up here, 1 physicist. We're evenly matched, Claudia.
I don't fit in.
Yeah, you definitely fit in. We're evenly matched. So I was at University of Alabama in Huntsville, went through the tenure process. I was Associate Dean for College of Science, and I served at the National Organization of Black Chemists and Chemical Engineers. And my arrival literally at NSF was fortuitous. I was at a conference with Louis Dale, and Louis Dale was having a conversation with Art Hicks. Art Hicks was running the LS-AMP program. They were having a conversation about rotators, and Louis Dale literally said, "Oh, Emanuel is interested in that." And I said, "Sure," and I applied because I know to listen to my mentors and those who advocate for you. And originally I was going to come in and work with LS-AMP, transition over to HBCU-UP, which was a blessing with Claudia, who I really enjoy working with. Claudia representing the real HU. I'll give her her props right now. I'm a Morehouse grad, so it really doesn't matter to me one way or the other, but since Hampton is up here, the real HU. So I was there for 2 years literally working with HBCU-UP, and saw Carleitta transition in my last year. I was with the chemistry director.
Well, thank you all. I'm really excited to engage in this conversation. And just to kick things off, just wonder, when you think about the HBCU-UP program and it being 25 years that it's been in existence, what are your immediate thoughts? What does that do for you?
Again, with the transitions, I'm just not good. Okay, so so 25 years of HBCU-UP to me is I'd say a beginning, right? Because there's so much to do and so much to make up for the 200 years before that. So I think that 25 years is an impressive commitment by NSF to a program, but we're not done. So I think the next 25 and maybe another 25 after that is what we should be looking for from the NSF and from the federal government.
So a couple of things come to mind. I think HBCU-UP is just about one of the only NSF programs, or a few, that is really grounded in the community, listens to the community, responds to the community and its needs. It has grown from the community, with the community. So I want to just share a quick story with you to show you one of the impacts of HBCU-UP. I was fortunate to be, after I retired, to be hired by the Center for the Advancement of STEM Leadership, CASTLE, who you heard today, to do a study to see how HBCUs fared leadership-wise during COVID. And just about in every interview, people told us about an HBCU-UP program that helped the institution during that time to move forward and to do what needed to be done. Thanks to HBCU-UP, particularly the targeted infusion and implementation projects, there were some faculty who had thought about teaching differently already and were poised when COVID hit and you had to pivot in like a week during spring break, who helped other faculty pivot, who helped their students, who were able to support students through the grants. That's when it really hit me, the impact HBCU-UP has on the community as a whole.
Well, Claudia talked about the COVID pandemic. I came to NSF in July of 2019, and in March of 2020, the pandemic hit. So I saw up close the HBCU-UP community in the transition. Now, I'll back up a little bit. I've always wanted to be involved with the HBCU community. HBCU grad, Morehouse grad, started my career at HBCU. Unfortunately, had to transition to a PWI, so I was very intentional wanting to come back to the HBCU community. But what I remember during that time of pandemic was the quick pivot with extremely limited resources and how people navigated extremely well. I was talking to one of my sons who's a HBCU grad, and he was chuckling about how people panic when there's not any Wi-Fi available. And one of his Morehouse brothers said, y'all don't walk around with a backup Ethernet cable in your back pocket. So it's that type of attitude that you get at HBCU. So being part of that community has been extremely valuable to me. And this is the family, the foundation, the care, and the love that you see in the community, and the impact of the HBCU-UP funding that leads to greater funding when you have those conversations. Then the last thing, which is a rhetorical question, talking about the pandemic, the quick pivot with very limited resources. Lots of time without tech support at your university. You may not have had departmental leadership support. But I always ask myself the question, people say it with pride that HBCUs punch above our weight. And I want to ask, why don't we get more money so we can stop having to say that? Because we make George Washington bleed every time we get a dollar bill. And it's inexcusable, as Jessie said, only for 25 years, whereas the way that African Americans historically excluded have been treated for the majority of the history of this country. So really, why do we have to keep punching above our weight? We really need more dollars. That's what I think about.
Well, thank you. That observation, that came full circle, right? We kind of started reflecting on that. It just hasn't been sufficient time. There's still more work to do, to some really focused, intentional comments about the community engagement and the importance of working with the community. You all really, as integral members to that process. And then, of course, underscoring your ability to navigate the COVID pandemic in your unique institutional context. For sure, HBCU-UP has been a resource in doing so, but we want to be clear, you did that work. You did that work during that time, and you're still doing that work on the back end of that time. And so if you're not aware, one of the goal of HBCU-UP, as it's currently indicated, is to enhance the STEM education and research capacity of HBCUs for the purpose of broadening participation in STEM, primarily focused on undergraduate education. And so, in full transparency, I don't know when that goal was actually established. I don't know if that was the goal at the beginning or if that has changed over time, but that is currently the goal. And so with that capacity building focus, that institutional capacity building focus, the next question is to ask you all from your perspective, how did NSF identify the priority areas for building capacity at HBCUs? You certainly can answer this by addressing how HBCU-UP prioritized it. I know that's a big ask of how NSF prioritized it, but it can be different if it's a programmatic lens. Have those areas varied based on the research intensiveness of HBCUs themselves, right? So we hear from the voice of the community, but how much have their productivity and activity, if you will, in that case, inform those priority areas? And then, of course, in that context, if you look over the 25-year history of the program, where have we been most successful in meeting that goal? So again, what has been the way we have prioritized it, but how has the program identified the goal and then measured its own success along the way?
So when I joined the program in 2003, Dr. Victor Santiago was program officer at the time, and so many of you might remember his leadership and what work that he did to stand up the program, which actually didn't have its name until 2000. Thank you for the history. So when I came, I was coming from the Department of Education, which has Congress essentially writing what the grant programs are going to be. So you can imagine the program is very different at NSF than at Department of Education. And so when I arrived, I was very pleased that what I could do was set up an opportunity for HBCUs to submit proposals for what they needed, right? And not put a lot of expectations or boundaries on it so that HBCUs could apply for, going to the next step from where they're at, right? And not expecting, 10,000 graduates or something in the solicitation. So I thought that was a strength of the program, that essentially you could design a project that was tailored to your context and your issues, the circumstances, whether you had state funding or you didn't, other economic trends in your state. All of those things could be part of your proposal, and it came up with a lot of different proposals as a result. So no two proposals look the same, and I think that is a strength of the program still, and something that I am so happy that NSF has maintained. And we haven't tried to direct you towards cybersecurity only, but it's cybersecurity and all the other things that you want to do. So I think one of the things that I did before I left was the targeted infusion projects, and that was an attempt to allow departments and individual faculty to identify a need that may have been smaller scale than the larger implementation grant, so that they could accomplish a very finite goal. So originally, because I'm a chemist, I thought that we could support chemistry departments to get ACS certification with that project. And so I do believe that we got a few of those out of that effort, but that was a really long time ago. So we'd have to go back and look at the data. But I do think that that was a nice complement to the implementation projects in the program, to allow kind of a range of projects, from the large multi-million-dollar projects to the smaller $300,000 projects.
So, to be honest, NSF cared really more that the HBCU program was successful so they could report to Congress than actually what was done in the program, which was to the advantage of the program officer, because I was able, as was Jessie and others, to see what is sort of missing, what do institutions need, and these are institutions that range from having 100 students to having 12,000 students. So my philosophy was, whatever NSF does not fund at HBCUs, HBCU-UP will fund. So in addition to targeted fusion projects, and Jessie was always teasing me about that, there were new tracks all the time. Research initiation awards for faculty, broadening participation research. They wouldn't let us call it education research. That was done in the education division. The centers, and so the program evolved based on the needs of the institutions. And of course, by being in touch with you at PI meetings, I and other program officers saw what was needed. I would be remiss, though, to not give you a few numbers. So when we're talking about capacity building and the fact that the success of this program is insane, given these numbers. HBCUs are typically funded collectively to the tune of $100 million by NSF per year. Now that is less money than the leading institutions get all by themselves. So all 100 institutions, or 89 who are funded, get less money than some of the big institutions. Yet, so much more is expected, right? We expect capacity to be built with this little bit of money. On top of everything else, there's this one program out of 300 NSF programs, this one program, HBCU-UP, that supplies about a third of the funding and is really concerned with building capacity. So the fact that people have predicted years ago that half of the HBCUs would close down because there wasn't enough capacity to keep going. We're all still here collectively. we've done a lot with this little bit of money, but to expect these miracles to happen and this research capacity to now be equivalent to those institutions who get $100 million a year all to themselves is a little unrealistic. That said, let's keep working at it.
That's a lot of good comments. It's difficult to follow up on. In my time, during the 2 years I was there, I was impressed by the targeted infusion, the research initiation, the EIR words, because it covers the breadth of HBCU. It addresses that historical mission of most HBCUs, which is to educate those who don't necessarily have opportunities to be educated elsewhere. You're familiar with HBCUs. You have a diverse demographic of students. You have students who are first generations, and I remind people that you also have students who are multi-generation college graduates. So you're working to satisfy both of those needs and do it well. There's a current narrative that HBCUs only educate first-generation college graduates, and they're doing the best they can do. You need to push back on that narrative that they are places of excellence, and the portfolio allows you to do that. As I mentioned earlier, during the pandemic, there was a lot of I saw the intellect and the ingenuity is the word I'm looking for with respect to continuing to do research. It was extremely impressive. And I saw some of you write that up, and then taking Claudia's lead when I came in, talking about, well, we need to publish what we're doing at HBCUs and why we do it well, so people can understand why we do it well. I'm not of the belief that other institutions can do it as well as HBCUs. That's my personal bias. Prove me wrong, please, but I don't think that's the case. So that leadership, in terms of writing about that leadership, writing about why we continually punch above our weight with little funding, why we do such a job of excellence, which was a lot of value. And I always look for that at that time when in the portfolio and talking to people. And I really enjoyed elevating individuals and hopefully connecting them with other directorates at the NSF where they could possibly get some money. But that's an entire another conversation that's probably best held at a bar as opposed to out loud. So.
Thank you all. And so I agree, right, that this expectation of HBCU-UP as a singular program to meet the needs of the entire ecosystem of institutions is a very unique expectation, right? But that doesn't diminish the fact that that is the expectation. I think it's important for you all to know that while NSF has evolved to now have the HBCU Rise component as a thread, if you will, under the banner of the CREST program is present, while HBCU Excellence in Research, or HBCU EIR, was birthed in HBCU-UP, it is now facilitated and managed by the Office of Integrative Activities. And so today we say that there are 3 NSF programs that focus on HBCUs. But again, the data is the data in terms of what those investments looks like across the portfolio. And so while institutional capacity building remains an integral component of that goal, we heard this morning some of the reflections in the second plenary session where some of those presidents were talking about the new buildings that were being created and being established, or the ideas of growing new degree programs. We heard the Morris Brown president talk about the new degree program in esports, for example. Those seem to be the perspectives of the leadership on those campuses about what it meant to build institutional capacity. The next question for you all is, what do you think those institutional capacity building needs are of HBCUs, and do they vary depending upon the focus of the mission of those said institutions?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I was thinking when you were talking, Claudia, is that one of the things that I continuously remind people at the NSF is that there is nothing wrong with an institution that has a teaching mission. And we shouldn't be trying to make everybody into a research institution. In fact, that just does not seem logical to me. We want teaching institutions. We want community colleges. We want predominantly undergraduate institutions, so that the range of students have a pathway to education. So I don't think that we should be trying to make HBCUs into research institutions unless that's part of their mission. And a long-term goal, if they're an emerging research institution, then we can help facilitate that. But that doesn't mean that we're only going to pay attention to those research institutions. We're going to pay attention to the community colleges because they're teaching a lot of STEM classes that need to transfer to a four-year institution if we want those students to stay in the academic STEM pathway. Or we want them to have a certificate or a degree that they can go into the workforce out of that two-year college. We want all of that. We don't just want PhD scientists. We want the whole range of the workforce across the institutions, and especially from HBCUs. So I do remind my colleagues at NSF that there's a range of the workforce. Almost, once a week we'll have to remind people. One of the things that I did try to do in my 4 years with HBCU-UP was to pay attention to the 13 community college HBCUs and try to create a pathway for them to participate in NSF. And of course, the challenge is the time and effort to write a proposal to NSF. But a couple of them did, and one of them tried to start a new biology degree, which would have fed into a four-year program, but it didn't work because she did not have the support that she needed to do that work, and she was literally doing like 6 other jobs. So there's challenges, right? But it doesn't mean we should give up. I don't think. I think we should figure out, well, what could we do? Could we give her more money to make that work? Maybe that would work, maybe not. Maybe there's something else. But I'll let you go.
Yeah, so when I watched Aaron's video today, a lot of the research capacity building centered around things that NSF simply does not fund. NSF does not build you a building. NSF really doesn't give you money to write a grant even. So capacity, though, can be built within the context of what NSF does fund, and that is to support faculty at HBCUs. Yes, we need to support students, and HBCU-UP is doing that in a number of ways, but to support individual faculty, to build their research programs so they can, in return, teach their students, and then support through the targeted infusion, the program development and such. But there is maybe a little bit more now at NSF that sort of looks at supporting infrastructure through programs like the granted program. So I'm optimistic that there is more to be done. But I think the one thing the HBCU-UP program has done really well is consider individual institutions. What can be done at some of the larger institutions in terms of research and capacity building simply can't be done at smaller institutions, or they don't even want that. But that doesn't mean that there aren't faculty at those institutions who want to do research. So to get over that hurdle to convince NSF that a faculty member at an institution that has 200 students can actually do research and should be funded is a little bit of a struggle. I'm rambling now, but so I'll turn it over to Emanuel. There's so much to say.
There is a lot to say. With respect to capacity building, I was listening to the comments, I was reflecting. There was a study or a book released recently by someone who studied the medical system in the United States. In the early 30s, there were perhaps numbers approximate 10 to 15 black medical schools. And there was a racist senator who decided that you needed to create standards, and these black medical schools disappeared. And when you work those numbers out, I think the number may have been like 10, we're missing like 10 or 20,000 black physicians we could have created over that time. So when I think about capacity building with respect to HBCUs, I think about numbers like that. We've done a great job in terms of those researchers getting students into laboratories. I was a part of the LSAMP portfolio and system. So, I mean, that research shows you get students into a laboratory, they're going to continue because they get excited about what they're doing. So that capacity building is important in terms of that research, that exposure to research, those research products, and those students continuing on. And it's like dropping a pebble into a pond. It's that ripple effect that then they touch other lives. So that's why I've been impressed about capacity building. But as I started off with, we need more money because we do much better than other institutions. I see people donate millions of dollars, billions of dollars to other institutions, and they talk about social impact. I'm like, you're just blowing smoke because HBCUs have the greatest social impact, bar none. I mean, I tell my white, green, brown friends, I say, if your son or daughter says that they want to be a scientist engineer, send them to a HBCU. Okay, that's their greatest chance of success. So
just a piece of history, okay? Question: who had the first 4-year medical school in the United States? What university had the first 4-year medical school in the United States? Guess? Shaw University in North Carolina, and it suffered the fate that you alluded to. There was all of a sudden this new standard, and they closed.
Wow. I didn't know that about Shaw. I know Shaw had done a few things in adjustments, but I didn't know about their medical school, so thank you for that. The juxtaposition, if you will, of what can be funded and what the needs are always seems to be a cyclical conversation, right? What can we fund and what do the institutions need? What can we fund and what do the institutions need? Somehow over this 25-year period, the program has found a way to meet some of those needs, right? We've been doing so, but the next question here is, what do you think will happen for the next 25 years? What should the program be looking to consider in terms of what it can fund versus the need?
So I think there's room for creativity and maybe trying something different, like a innovation fund or something that would have a lower bar for access to support ideas that maybe need a quick turnaround or just need an infusion of dollars to leverage another opportunity or something like that. Ideas labs, which I think you had one recently. And so I think there's some room to be innovative, but I think there's also room to stay with the core support for improving curriculum and supporting the faculty at HBCUs and encouraging research where research is desired. And I think we need to probably ensure that we're talking, we continue the conversation, right? So that we stay in touch. One of the things that's happening now, if you follow the federal budget, I'm sure you're all budget wonks, the NSF budget has been tagged with an expectation that 20% of the total NSF budget will go to EPSCoR states. Mm-hmm. So we're currently around 10% of our budget. So that's kind of like a doubling. And some directorates it's much lower, and other directorates it's much higher. So education is pretty good, at like 15% right now, but over the next 5 years. And so there's some tension there, I think, because there's not a lot of HBCUs in AppScore states. And so what does that mean? I don't think it means that HBCU-UP funds are going to be reduced or cut. I do not think that. But I do think that the rest of the foundation is going to be looking to try and meet this goal that's somewhat arbitrary, set by Congress. And it's kind of a new thing for NSF to be told where to spend money. I appreciate that they tell us to spend money at HBCUs and HSIs and tribal colleges. I do appreciate that because that means it comes with some committed dollars that cannot be moved to other places. But in this case, I'm not sure it's a smart move. So anyway, that's on the horizon, and I don't know what that means. So keep an eye out.
Yeah, and Claudia, just before you go, if you're not familiar with EPSCoR states, I just wanted to underscore that those are states or jurisdictions where there is an annual calculation of how much investment is incurring in those states, and all of the states that are currently identified are under that threshold. So there's an attempt to increase investments in these states and jurisdictions where there's been underinvestment or divestment in those jurisdictions, just to give some context in that.
So following up on what Jessie said, HBCU-UP is one of the few programs where Congress actually tells NSF at what level they have to fund the program. They don't do that for many other programs. It's also a program that has bipartisan support, and that's rare these days. But Republican and Democratic senators and congressmen come from the states where HBCUs are located, and their constituents benefit from the HBCUs and from the NSF funding. So I'm saying that to you. Jessie can't say that. But find those advocates in Congress. Eddie Bernice Johnson was a big one. Alma Adams from North Carolina call them, call their offices, tell them why you're calling, tell them you're calling about HBCU-UP and support for the program, so that it goes along with the trends in NSF funding of seeing significant increases. Let them know the impact this program has had on you, on your HBCU, on your state, on your city. And do a little bit of lobbying on your own, so we can get that budget increased, so Carleitta can figure out what it is you need, what your priorities are, what you need in terms of capacity building, and the program can continuously evolve. I have no doubt that over the next 25 years, great things will happen because they happen synergistically. The program officers, along with you will tell us what you need. We try. I still say we. I have not been at NSF in a few years. NSF, HBCU-UP will try to work with your needs. But you got to do a little bit of work. I tell you which program had a great lobbying arm and still does. That's the LSM program. HBCU-UP needs to do the same.
So I'll piggyback on that. The advocacy and the lobbying is absolutely critical, and your words matter in terms of spreading the news. I think about one of my graduate students, a graduate student I mentored when I was in Huntsville, who was immigrated from China, and I told him about HBCUs. He had never been exposed to HBCUs. So I explained to him what HBCUs do. Turns out he went on a policy trip, and he met a congressperson, and he called me up and said, Dr. Waddell, I told the congressperson all about HBCUs and how important they are. So your advocacy and you spreading the word matters, because you have to remember that a lot of people, the only thing they think about HBCUs is they have great bands. And we do. I mean, but you have to spread the news. I mean, if it was up to me, I would double and triple the budget. But also in terms of that infrastructure, that capacity building, I think it's clear to all of us with HBCUs. It's not only the research, because we're capable researchers, but it's the infrastructure surrounding that research. Being able to order something and it shows up the next day, as opposed to the next year. I mean, being able to use funds to hire somebody to do that well, where you can just make one phone call or walk up to someone's office and you continue your research without. I'm a big believer in emotional energy. And I say we use a lot of emotional energy in terms of the back and forth, in terms of trying to track down supplies that you ordered, and it's been 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, 6 months, and you're still trying to figure out where those supplies are. That's a lot of emotional energy that you could be using to mentoring your students, that you could be directing towards your research, or really helping people understand that, the administrative assistants are extremely important. The people who send the invoices are extremely important. I remember Claudia on her way out, I remember sitting in on a phone call, a university had not sent in the invoices. And she was like, we don't want this money back. Where are the invoices? And I know we as scientists do not have control over that, but we need, if it was up to me, we would have the ability that, here's a grant and we're doubling that or tripling that so you can hire the infrastructure and hire the people to actually assist you in implementing the grant so you can do your science and other people take care of all the other stuff. And a lot of people I know I'm talking to the choir, but people take that for granted and they just don't get it.
Well, I just want to highlight, there was a reference to the new initiative granted at the NSF. And so if you are not aware of it, I just wanted to underscore that granted, again, is managed by the Office of Integrative Activities. But the intent of that program is to fund your research infrastructure in the way that you need it. So as I understand, if you're looking to understand more about it, I invite you to reach out to the colleagues who represent that program. We will have representation tomorrow doing concurrent breakout session 3, where there'll be a series of panels, one of which is entitled Institutional Capacity Building, and one of the panelists is representing the granted program. Just so that you know that there is funding at the National Science Foundation to identify and potentially onboard new people that you might need at your universities to support some aspect of your grantsmanship ecosystem, right? The procurement, the procurement processes for sure. Maybe it's finances, maybe it's proposal development, right? It could be any aspect, as I understand, of what you need at your institution. But I will say that it is a fairly new initiative that are just coming out with announcing some of those awards. It's my understanding that there's been one HBCU that was recently awarded or a part of a consortium of institutions with Spelman College was recently announced as receiving one of these granted initiatives, upwards of $14 million, okay? So in reading and my familiarity with that program, I don't think there's any budgetary limitations on what you might be able to propose, but it does require you to understand your context and identify what you need. And I would encourage you to recognize that there is no need that is too small to fill the need, okay? So, don't try to imagine what other people might be thinking about to enhance their institutional capacity for grants support. Think about what you need and just craft a proposal that meets your need. Okay, so we're about to close. I'm going to ask one more question, but before I do, I just wanted to pause and see if there were any questions from the audience. And I don't mind, we've been sitting for a little bit, so I don't mind walking.
Okay, so HBCU-UP doesn't just fund HBCUs. So in the current portfolio, Hopkins has HBCU-UP funding. And while I value them wanting to work with our schools, I have a visceral response to that. They don't need our funding. How do you all as program officers help to navigate making sure you're helping to do what's best for the community while also doing what's best for the community? What does that look like for you all?
So I think we look at very carefully, or I did, past tense. When there was an institution that wasn't an HBCU, that was a partner, Hopkins would never get a single award. But if that institution is necessary to carry out what the HBCUs do or the HBCU partners, that's why you might see funding at some institutions that are not HBCUs. We also fund some organizations. Why do I keep saying we?
We do.
HBCU-UP has and continues to fund some organizations too that are committed to supporting HBCUs. So it's not like Hopkins gets funds for something that Hopkins wants to do specifically to assist and support. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Maybe two more after this.
Dr. Waddell actually said exactly the same thing I want to say. I tried to say earlier this morning, which is the procurement and other related issue like hiring. I made my point, I think, earlier this morning. I would still suggest, if possible, so maybe HBCU-UP program can talk with the Office of Sponsored Research Program and maybe hire administrative positions in terms of how we can, or at least for those grants supported by this program, to get carried out smoothly. So that, again, involves a lot of maybe some changes in procurement, in hiring, in accounting. We don't want to say all our expenses not counted, when the grant is getting close to finish. So we want to make sure that all the things have been done properly and timely. So if that anyway, so your office could maybe be in contact with some other, institutions receiving the funding and to help us, essentially the PI and the co-PI, to make sure our grant get carried out smoothly. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I just want to underscore that right now the granted program is that mechanism to support the onboarding of administrative support, if that's what you identify as your need. It does have an emphasis on sustainability. So I want to be proactive and let you know that while the granted initiative will support ideas that help build that capacity, the lifetime of the grant is for a finite period. And so how those individuals who are serving in those current roles, there needs to be some intentional thinking about the sustainability of that strategy should it be supported by the granted program.
Can I add also that your Title III Part B funds can unrestrictedly be used to improve the infrastructure, including staff and training, even building renovations, endowment building. Your Title III Part B funds can be used for all of those things. So my strongest suggestion is to find out who your Title III Part B coordinator is and make friends with them and let them know how what you're doing complements what they're doing and you should be working together towards a common goal. And your leadership should also see the value potential in that kind of a coordinated effort.
Any other questions? Seeing no hands, then I will pose the final question of the evening to the panelists. And that is, if there was only one thing that you hope the people assembled here today in the audience would take away as a result of our conversation, what would that one thing be?
You have a friend in Carleitta, Paige-Anderson, and others, that you really do take advantage of the fact that you have friends at NSF.
That would have to be my takeaway too, that You can talk to program officers, even ones you don't know. You can call them, or you can more easily reach them by email and give them some times when you can chat. Maybe offer to set up the Zoom meeting, include a little bit of information about what you're interested in talking about. Program officers will generally get back to you. And if they don't, let one of us know in the Ease division, and we'll try to help you find someone who will get back to you. Okay.
I have nothing to add. That's absolutely correct. Carleitta Paige-Anderson is your friend, and NSF cares, and you matter, and keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you all. I'll just pause here for a second, though, because I don't want to omit any potential questions that may have come in virtually. So at this time, I'd like to ask the AAAS team if there are any virtual questions that we might be able to field. Thank you for confirming. There doesn't seem like there's any online. And so with that, I would like to ask you to join me in thanking our panelists for joining us this evening. We appreciate you. We know that we have a friend in you all as well. And so we thank you for really your steadfast commitment to this program. I am not one for sentiment often, but I have to say that this group, their commitment to what they do is completely inspiring of how I show up every day. Right? To know that you're working on behalf of a program that has had other persons give their all for the benefit of the HBCU community is not something that I take for granted. And so I just want to thank you for establishing that foundation and that legacy, and that has everything to do with why we assemble on an annual basis. And we will continue this legacy that you all have been so instrumental in forging. And so with that, I'd like to also just briefly say, in terms of tomorrow, right? What can you expect for tomorrow? For our virtual audience, I want to remind you that there is just one live stream session tomorrow that will be the third plenary session. I'm really excited about that conversation that will be facilitated by Dr. Kelly Mack. So we invite you to join us in that conversation tomorrow for that third plenary session. For those of you who are here in person, I want to remind you that we will begin at 9 a.m. tomorrow. We will be in concurrent breakout sessions by track. So hopefully everyone has been able to access those documents that I referenced earlier today, specifically the worksheet, because that will be the primary driver of our conversation. Across all the tracks. So again, pick the one that aligns best with your interest, but certainly we look forward to those conversations. I also referenced this, but following that concurrent breakout session 2 will be concurrent breakout session 3. And that we will feature 7 different concurrent panels, okay, that are featuring NSF program officers from across the agency, as well as organizational representatives from other funding agencies beyond the National Science Foundation. So we are really excited about being able to continue to partner with other federal agencies who have their own unique programs to support the HBCU community. And that is both STEM and non-STEM opportunities. Okay, so we believe we have a wide range of expertise that will be assembled here, and those same individuals and more will also be part of our 2 p.m. informal rapid discussions. So this is also a reminder that if you have not yet signed up for those rapid meetings, if you go to the guidebook and select the requisite documents, there's a link for each of the 47 programs and or organizations that will be here that have made themselves available to interact with you, because you are deserving as any group, but probably even more deserving for all that you do to advance your respective scientific endeavors, but also for the benefit of the students and the communities that you serve. So tomorrow, another full day, but we are looking forward to having you engage accordingly. And with that, I bid you well farewell for the evening. Thank you so much. Hopefully you had a great day one.
This was sort of fun.